The Olympics are the biggest sporting event in the world. They mean triumph, goosebumps, and records. But behind the top athletic performances and shiny medals, there are also moments that are deeply shocking. Because in fact, the Olympic Games have already seen terrible accidents and tragedies, and some of them still cast a shadow over the Games to this day, just like this incident that happened in a sport that was then completely removed from the Olympic program, speed skiing. In speed skiing, the goal was literally to reach extremely high speeds on skis, sometimes even over 250 kilometers per hour. In 1992, it was decided to include this highly controversial sport in the Olympic program, but that decision was very quickly regretted because it led to a terrible incident involving the Swiss athlete Nicolas Bochatay. He already knew how dangerous the sport was, but unfortunately, that didn't protect him. What doomed him wasn't a loss of control or a skiing mistake, but something else. Bochatay wanted to warm up with his teammates on a public slope before his race. He was slightly ahead of the other skiers and came to a hill that blocked his view. He couldn't see what was behind it, and that led directly to a horrible accident. Suddenly, Bochatay saw a snow groomer right in front of him and had only a split second to react. He couldn't change his direction any longer and crashed straight into the machine at full speed. Bochatay lost his life instantly, and the dangerous event was quickly removed from the Olympic program by the committee. That athletes are sometimes powerless against outside circumstances was something the 21-year-old professional luger Nodar Kumaritashvili from Georgia also had to experience. His accident became the most tragic moment in modern Olympic history, and that happened on the very opening day of the Olympic Games. It was February 12th, 2010 in Vancouver, Canada, when Nodar wanted to do one last practice run on the well-known Whistler Sliding Centre track. Even back then, the track was considered extremely dangerous. It was steeper, faster, and technically more demanding than any before it. Many lugers had deep respect for the high level of difficulty on this course. One athlete once reached a record speed of 154 kilometers per hour. That is 18 kilometers per hour faster than what was even allowed. And it was exactly this high speed that doomed Nodar in the last treacherous curve. He suddenly lost control of his sled, was thrown out of it, and flew off the track. He slammed his head against a metal pole. Rescue teams rushed to him immediately, tried to resuscitate him, and even attempted to fly him to a nearby hospital by helicopter. But despite all efforts, he died from his severe injuries. Let us now go far back into the past, to the Olympic Summer Games of 1912. Back then, the Games took place in Stockholm, and at the time of the event, it was extremely hot there. This became a particular problem during the marathon, because the temperatures rose so high that a third of all runners didn't even take part in the marathon at all. They feared for their health. And that was justified because in the end, out of over 60 runners, only 36 made it to the finish line, and Lazaro was not one of them. His run came to an extremely tragic end. At first, he managed to keep up his pace well, but after 30 kilometers, the heat took such a toll on his body that he collapsed and lost consciousness. The doctors measured a body temperature of 41 degrees Celsius in him, which corresponds to a very high fever. And this didn't happen by chance. At the hospital, they also noticed something else. Lazaro had rubbed his entire body with oil, hoping that this would prevent sunburn and excessive sweating. However, it had the opposite effect. He prevented his natural sweating process so he couldn't cool down. In fact, this mistake cost him his life because Lazaro died the next morning. Let's continue with a real Olympic star. At least the Yugoslav tennis player Monica Seles was supposed to become exactly that, because in 1993 she was one of the greatest tennis talents in the world. Many were already looking forward to her appearance at the Olympic Games, but then there was an incident that still grips the tennis world even today, 30 years later. But what exactly happened? In 1993, just before the Olympic Games, Monica was playing a quarter-final match against the Bulgarian Magdalena Malieva at the Citizen Cup tennis tournament in Hamburg. When Monica briefly sat down during the changeover break and turned her back to the audience behind her, one spectator seized the chance and attacked the player in a cruel way with a knife. She screamed out, and only then did the people around her understand what was happening. Until that moment, nobody had noticed the knife in the hand of Günther Paci. Other spectators overpowered him while Monica collapsed on the court. He had stabbed her just next to the spine and inflicted a 3.5 centimeter deep wound. At the hospital, the doctors said that Monica had been lucky in misfortune because she had barely survived and also barely escaped to life in a wheelchair. Monica later said that her personality was permanently changed in a fraction of a second. But the craziest part of this story is the motive of the attacker. He was a fanatical Steffi Graf fan and saw in Monica Seles, who at that time was the world #1, her biggest rival. And that is why he wanted to eliminate her. In fact, Monica Seles' career was permanently changed after this traumatic attack, and she struggled to return to the top of the world. The 23-year-old Danish cyclist Knud Ennemark Jensen also had to pay for his passion with his life. He took part in the Olympic Summer Games of 1960 in Rome and rode the toughest race of his life there. The reason was the extremely high temperatures of over 40 degrees. Many athletes that day suffered from dehydration and heat stroke. And Knud also complained of discomfort already at the beginning of the 100-kilometer team time trial. But for him, giving up was not an option. Also because one member of his Danish team had already dropped out due to heat stroke, and they would have been disqualified if Knud had also quit. His teammates grabbed him by his jersey to support him and tried to cool him down with water. For a short time, that had a positive effect, but then he still lost his balance and fell off the bike. He slammed his head on the asphalt and suffered a severe concussion. But instead of bringing him straight into an air-conditioned room afterwards, Knud was placed in a military hospital tent, where it was even hotter than outside. He lay there unconscious for 2 hours at an unbelievable 50 degrees. And that, in the end, was his death sentence. He died in that tent from heat stroke. And now to a sport that looks so elegant and effortless, but in reality carries enormous risks of injury. We are talking about figure skating. In 2007, a tragedy occurred here that surely gave all the spectators goosebumps from shock. During an Olympic preparation competition, Jessica Dubé and Bryce Davison, who had already performed together for several years as a Canadian skating pair, executed many spins and throws on the ice. Among them was the so-called side-by-side spiral, where both performed pirouettes next to each other in sync. In the third rotation, it happened. Bryce turned too close to Jessica and slashed her face with his razor-sharp skate blade. She fell to the ice, and the surface immediately turned red. The audience watched in shock as Jessica was carried away and brought to the hospital. The doctors saved not only her face with over 80 stitches, but also her life, since she had lost a huge amount of blood. In fact, she dared to return to the ice with her partner just 2 months later, though with a massive scar across her face that cannot be overlooked. Compared to the next case, one has to say that Jessica actually got off relatively lightly, because for 25-year-old Ignat Stiefson, the Olympic Games in Berlin in 1936 had a far more tragic ending. He was a very experienced pilot and head of the Austrian glider team. Shortly before his official flight demonstration was supposed to begin, he wanted to make a test flight. A very large crowd of spectators had gathered to watch him because Stiefson had always been considered especially talented at using wind and thermal updrafts to his advantage. This allowed him to perform unique maneuvers in the air with his glider. And he did so this time as well, but suddenly one of the wings broke down and the plane went into a free fall within seconds. He knew he had to try everything to escape the aircraft if he wanted to survive. That is why he opened his parachute and hoped it would pull him away from the aircraft before the crash. But he was only 700 meters above the ground and there was no longer enough time for it to fully open. He hit the ground and was killed instantly. Which case shocked you the most? Feel free to write to us in the comments. If you enjoyed the video, leave a like and subscribe.